Employer drug testing, something that is very important these days in an ever-changing landscape. Today we're going to talk about the common questions that employers have about drug testing. Hi, I'm Tom Fulmer with National Drug Screening, and welcome to our video series. In the studio today with us is Mr. Joe Reilly, President of National Drug Screening. Joe's been in the industry since the early 90s, back in the beginning of drug testing, basically, and has a lot of experience in the industry. He has served on the boards of many associations, spoken at many conferences around the country, and working with organizations really all over the country to help them put drug-free workplace programs in place to serve as an expert witness in many situations. And he's a wealth of information. Appreciate you joining us today. Joe, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here, Tom. Looking forward to answering some of your questions about employer drug testing.
Yeah, employer drug testing is really important these days, especially with the changing legal landscape. And here at National Drug Screening, we got a lot of questions from employers, and there are more questions coming every day. So we've kind of picked the top questions that we think that people would like to know the answer for, and are going to let you answer those and share your wealth of information with us, if you don't mind with that.
That sounds wonderful.
So let me ask you this. Is drug testing required for employers, or required in some situations and not others? How does that work?
Sure. So it actually is the latter, which you mentioned. Drug testing is required in some situations, and in other situations, it's not required. So where it is required is employers that are regulated by the United States Department of Transportation, or DOT, and that generally includes transportation industries like the trucking industry, the bus industry, aviation, airlines, vessels for hire on our waterways, pipeline operations, oil and gas operations, Federal Transit Administration, Federal Railroad Administration. So we call those the DOT-regulated industries. And then we have the non-DOT industries, which is by far a lot more. It's like all businesses in America. They're not required to have drug testing by federal or state law. They do it voluntarily to have a safe work environment. But sometimes they are required to do drug testing because of an insurance requirement, or because they do work for another company, and that other company they're doing work for requires them to be a drug-free workplace or to have drug testing programs.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so, with the ones that are required, obviously there's guidelines, there's rules, there's regulations. You don't really have a choice in those circumstances, and you cannot, opt not to do those. But for the non-regulated testing companies, what would lead them to do drug testing or have a drug-free workplace policy? What would be the benefit of them having that?
Yeah, so the biggest reason for a company to implement a drug-free workplace when they're not required to do so, but it's going to be a good idea for safety. So that's the biggest reason, because safety is just so important. If somebody has an accident, it can cause a lot of liability, a lot of expense. So safety is the biggest reason. But we also see other reasons, such as productivity is better when you don't have substance abusers working in your workplace. Absenteeism and tardiness could be affected. Theft in the workplace could occur. Workers' comp claims, you want to try and avoid those because they're going to cost a lot of money. Also, public relations and advertising. We are a drug-free workplace, particularly in businesses where maybe they send employees into somebody's home to do work, like installing an alarm system or installing cable TV. You got people in your home that you don't know, and as a homeowner, you would want to be confident that that person had a background check and that person had a drug screen.
Yeah, I mean, those are very important things, and we've had some very specific questions from employers, and one of those, it really revolves around, how do I do drug testing right? Because there's a lot of legal liability, there's rules and regulations, so how do they put a drug testing program that's right or in compliance with whatever state laws there are out there?
Yeah, that's a great question, because when I started in drug testing back in 1993, most drug testing was DOT regulated, so it was set up to be done a certain way and no variations. But today, with the changing legal landscape and state laws, There's actually over 700 state laws that affect drug testing throughout the United States. A lot of that is with marijuana. So there's a lot of challenges with marijuana testing in certain states where marijuana may be legal recreationally or medically. So what employers need to do it right is to have a drug-free workplace written policy that spells out the who, what, where, when, and how of the drug testing program. And that policy should be developed in conjunction with legal counsel or an expert. We develop policies here at National Drug Screening so that everything is covered. All the basics are covered. What you can do, what you can't do, considering the state law in the state where you're operating. Right. So in some states, there may be some restrictions on testing for marijuana. In other states, there may not be. In some states, there may be some restrictions on doing instant or point of collection testing. In other states, there may not be. So for an employer to implement a drug testing program, we highly recommend first they set up a policy in conjunction with an expert or legal counsel to make sure the policy covers what the state law's intents are and also covers the employer from liability issues.
Right. And for those policies, I mean, obviously that's a very important criteria because you have to follow, what those regulations are. Do you find that some employers may be operating in multiple states or maybe, as you mentioned earlier, both regulated by the Department of Transportation for that required testing and be doing other testing in conjunction with that? Kind of how does that relate to policies and policy development?
Sure. So absolutely. Companies that have both DOT and non-DOT employees, that DOT policy is separate only for those DOT-covered employees. Then if they're going to drug test the non-DOT employees, they have to have a separate non-DOT policy for those folks. Regarding employers that operate in multiple states, the non-DOT policy becomes much more complex. Okay? So we're going to write the policy based on the home state where the company is located. And then depending on what other states they operate in, we're going to have addendums to the policy. So for example, if their home base is Florida, they operate in Georgia and South Carolina and North Carolina, we're going to have addendums that cover something that's outside of the main policy for that particular state. So for example, also in California, starting January 1st of this year, there's a new law that restricts marijuana testing with a urine specimen. So that California addendum would have to say, we're not going to do marijuana testing, or we're not going to do it with urine. We might do it, for example, with oral fluid, because that is going to be allowed under the new California law, because oral fluid testing is looking for the parent drug, where urine drug testing is looking for a metabolite. In California, the law is saying we don't want to restrict employees from doing something at home on their own time that's legal. And marijuana is legal in California.
Right. And I think that's a very important point these days with changing regulations and all that. And that's actually one of the common questions we get from employers is about the marijuana testing. So, what's the situation with that? I mean, you talked about it just a little bit there, but is it legal? Is it not legal? Does it vary? And, how important is that to make sure that employers are actually addressing that right now?
Yeah. So like I talked about a few minutes ago, it really comes down to the company's policy. And a company that's had a policy for 15 years or so, or 10 years, they need to revisit that policy. So it's a state-by-state situation. You got to understand the laws in the state that you operate in. Mm-hmm. We have states that have medical marijuana. We have states that have recreational marijuana. We have states that have both medical and recreational. Mm-hmm. We have states that don't have any legal marijuana. We have states that are more restrictive on marijuana testing. Right now in New York State, we do not recommend any marijuana testing for non-DOT. Mm-hmm. Okay. In California and the state of Washington, effective January 1st, there's restrictions on using urine. So it's a state-by-state situation, and the employer needs expert advice to figure out what they need to do, put in their policy, revise their policy. But One thing to note, very important, in the DOT program, it's a federal program, marijuana is always tested, and marijuana is a prohibited substance. And as an employee working in a DOT-covered position, it doesn't matter if you have a medical marijuana card or your state allows recreational marijuana. Marijuana is prohibited, and you can lose your job if you test positive for marijuana in a DOT-regulated position.
Yeah, and especially, it's a especially complex issue out there with that. And one of the questions we get is, should we continue to test for marijuana or should we not? As you mentioned, certain laws, they pretty much control that question, but in other areas, maybe it's not so clear. And then they ask questions such as, should we continue doing drug testing? What about for the other drugs that are commonly abused? So what do you have to say about that?
Sure. So just right off the bat, there are companies that are just eliminating marijuana, period. Whether it's because of the state law, whether it's because of a philosophy of the company's leadership, they don't want to mess with it, the state law restricts it, whatever it is, any company can eliminate marijuana from their drug testing panel. So typically companies do a 5-panel drug test or a 10-panel drug test. You just get with their drug testing vendor and say, we want to take marijuana off that panel. So that's one solution. The other solution is to, again, state by state, you got to look at the laws. And then some people say, well, maybe we should just give up on drug testing. Well, that's not a great idea, okay?
Yeah.
Because if somebody's using heroin, somebody's using cocaine, they can have an accident and they can cost the company thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's a lot of liability involved with employing substance abusers. There's a huge methamphetamine problem in this country. Cocaine use is on the rise. Heroin is on the rise. And then we've got the whole opioid situation with Oxycontin and other expanded opiate type drugs that people are abusing. And if those people are working in your workplace, you got liability going on. You got the potential for great liability.
Correct. And I think those are really good points that employers need to take into consideration. And really think through this and talk to somebody to make sure they make the best decisions on that. And you mentioned something about employers having employees in the workplace and all that. So does drug testing really apply to large companies, to small companies? Is it relevant to both these days?
Sure. So for DOT, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Small or large, if you're DOT regulated, you got to do drug testing. If you're non-DOT, a company with 1 or 2 employees, we typically don't see them drug testing, okay? But when you get into over 3 and you're buying workers' comp insurance, and really, depending on what type of job functions the employees have, any company that has any type of safety, sensitive type positions should be doing drug testing, okay? But we also see in the financial industry, we see drug testing. Automobile dealerships, we see drug testing. You never know. We see nonprofits, we see churches, we see schools. So all types of employers do drug testing. And it reminds me of years ago, I had a friend who had a very small manufacturing company, about 15 people, and actually had a grant from the federal government that actually paid me to implement drug testing programs for small businesses. And the small businesses didn't have to pay any money. Right. I got the money from the federal government in a grant. And I said to my friend, his name is Mike, I said, Mike, maybe you should implement a drug-free workplace program. It's not going to cost you any money, and you're going to get a discount and save some money on your workers' comp insurance. No, Joe, I don't need that. I know all my employees. They come to my house for Thanksgiving. I know everybody. Nobody uses drugs. I don't need that. Okay. Well, about a year later, I ran into Mike at a Rotary Club meeting. And he said, Joe, it was like the second week in January. He says, Joe, I really wish I had listened to you last year when you talked about implementing a drug-free workplace program. And I said, why, Mike? What's going on? He says, well, right before Christmas, our employee that drives our company van and delivers, small pieces of furniture that we manufacture, he wrecked the van, total loss. He pulled into a building and damaged the building severely. he ended up in the hospital, big workers' comp claim. And we went to the hospital and we visited with him, and his wife called me aside and said, well, you know, Bob's been using crack cocaine for about 2 years now.
Wow. That's incredible.
And if only they had had a drug testing program and maybe identified him early on and maybe got him help for that issue and maybe retained him as a good employee. And Mike said immediately, we need to get that program implemented tomorrow.
Yeah, and that's a sad situation, but that's also not unique. That's something we hear about at National Drug Screening, quite often. When people start something, it's because of an issue happened, and being proactive is a lot better way to go.
Absolutely. And sometimes it doesn't happen in the workplace. Sometimes it happens in somebody's family that something happens. And every family has, whether it's in the immediate family or extended family, friends, relatives, cousins, whatever, everybody's got a substance abuse situation that they've encountered in their family or extended family.
Yeah, that's very true. And I know here at National Drug Screening, we provide a lot of services nationwide and all that. Can you share with our different people that are watching today, what are a little bit about the services that are provided here at National Drug Screening, and what do we do to help in this situation?
Sure. So as you mentioned, we provide nationwide service in all states in the United States. So if a company is brand new to drug testing, we kind of help them, we do some consulting and guidance on implementing a policy for them, and we write the policy. We provide them some employee educational materials to give to the employees to help the employees understand the policy and to understand the harmful effects of drugs in the workplace. Nobody wants to work next to someone who's using illicit drugs because it's going to take down that person too. We provide supervisor training, and that's about supervisors recognizing someone who might be impaired and then initiating a reasonable suspicion drug test based on a reasonable suspicion that that person might be under the influence of drugs or alcohol while working, and that's a huge safety issue. We help employees establish an employee assistance program or an EAP. They might have one already. If they do, we identify it in the drug-free workplace policy. If they have group health insurance, they typically have an employee assistance program in that group health insurance. If they don't, we provide them a resource file of places where employees that need help with a potential substance abuse issue can go and get confidential help. So it's a full program, 5 components: policy, education, supervisor training, employee assistance program, drug testing. We can do all of it for an employer, or maybe they only need one of those 5 components or 2 of those 5 components. We can do that also. Employer calls us up today and they need a pre-employment drug test today. We can get it done today.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that really stands out is that, we're actually very responsive, and that's something that you've implemented from top down since day one of actually being there to not only have all the information, but also have the tools and resources to help employers.
Absolutely.
So, thank you for sharing your insights with us today. We really appreciate hitting those most common questions. I know we have some more videos coming up, so make sure you join us with those and get all your questions answered. And as always, there's some great resources on www.nationaldrugscreening.com. We freely share all of this information. Joe shares his insights out there, both with the videos and with a lot of blog post articles. So thanks for joining us, Joe. Thank you for joining us today. Appreciate your insights.
Welcome. It was good to be here. It was good to talk to our audience. If you like this video, there's other videos. Check them out on our website. Check them out on YouTube. And we'll be back with another video on employer drug testing in the short future.
Absolutely. Make sure you follow, like, and subscribe to keep updated on all of the things that are going on with National Drug Screening. We look forward to seeing you on the next video.